There you go.
So I guess you should repeat, Craig. For
Yeah,
the
so what I
recording,
was
what
saying
just
is that
happened.
we've been moving for minutes on at least the council and probably most committees as well to what we call action minutes. So it's essentially just a very short recording of, this agenda item was discussed and what the vote was if there was a vote, because of the fact that we have the archive of these Zoom calls. So if anybody wants exactly what was said, they can just go to the Zoom call. We don't need to record that in the minutes. So it's a much simpler job than secretary may have been for committee members in the past.
And if you don't want to do it, we'll find another way. It's just more of action items.
Yeah, no, actually, when I was on the cable committee, we always did action minutes. So
Yeah.
that's fine with me. I'm just saying, I like to share the wealth. So if anyone else wants to do it, please, don't be afraid to volunteer.
No, but I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There are 21 participants. Is everybody a member of the committee? If not, who is a committee member of this group?
No, there are 7 committee members right now. You
Six right now.
6. Well, and Bud is an honorary
Bud
member.
shortly.
He will be a member. So you and Dee are the new members. So Bud, raise your hand. He's a new member, and he is on the Emergency Preparedness Committee. So he is our liaison to the Emergency Preparedness Committee. Dee is another new member. We're so excited to have you. Dee, you want to raise your hand?
Where is he? There.
Okay, great. And then MJ is a senior member. And then Craig is our liaison from the town council. Of course, he's the mayor.
And I'm technically not a member. We removed the council member from the committee. So.
And then Nona is our wonderful liaison from the Conservation Committee. And we're always looking for new members if anyone is interested. So back to secretary. If anyone later on decides they want to be secretary, let us know. And I'm sure MJ would be happy to hand it over. So MJ, are you willing to be secretary if you're voted in?
Yeah, I'm trying to write down what we already did.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. So can we have a show of hands to elect MJ as secretary? Wanda?
Yes.
Nona? Craig? Oh, wait, you're not a voting member.
Not a voting member, yeah.
Dee? Yeah, me. Okay, so MJ, you are a secretary. Okay. Great. Okay, so oral communications. This is the section where if you have a comment that is not covered under the agenda, you can raise it. And I would like to say that on this meeting agenda, the next meeting is recorded as June 7th. And I think that should be July 5th. So I don't know.
July 5 or 6, I couldn't hear you.
I think it's July 5th. It's always the first Tuesday of the month.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so does anyone on the committee have something for oral communications? Nona?
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to say, I hope we can get some help making up for lost time, rather than have lost time be kind of doubly impacting us. And it may be that this will come under staff updates, but I have 2 particular concerns. One is that we missed our update on the safety element. And the other, it's like there's somebody calling in on the line. And then the second thing is that I would really like to see us move ahead with some of the reports that were prepared by previous committee members, especially the Canyon report, which is near completion. It's really great. And I have some edits to it. So I'd hate to see us lose more time than we already have.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah, Nona, I have to say, in transitioning, without the previous chair and all of the transition that's been happening, I did my best in assembling the agenda for today. So if there are items I overlooked, then for sure the committee should not take that as a sign that they shouldn't be picked up and continued. It was just what I could find having not been the liaison myself, so I wasn't super familiar with what you've been working on.
And Nona, I agree with you. And one of the questions I'm going to have for Cara is, how can I communicate with the members to make sure that we are putting on the agenda what everyone wants? And we do want to get to those things. So, okay, do we have anyone out in Zoom land that would like to have an oral communication that's not on the agenda? So Christy, and I don't have control, so I guess Jeremy or Craig.
Yeah, they should be able to unmute themselves, and so if you call on them, they can unmute. That it's not a webinar, so they'll be able to control it on their end.
Christy?
Yes, I also agree, maybe at the end of every meeting, in fact, a lot of meetings in Portola Valley, if we could have committees ask what they want on the next agenda. I'm noticing even town council meetings that other cities do that at the end of their meeting, and that might take everyone's thoughts into consideration. Thank you.
And then we have a person with a phone number 6787562.
Good afternoon, Caroline Wertongen. I want to thank the residents for coming together and for filling in for this very important committee. I want to assure you, we stand by you. We will help you if needed. You should know that many of the residents have volunteered to be on committees. I have not volunteered on this committee, but on other committees. So when we come to these meetings, we want to make sure that you get the right information, and we will jump in if the information is incorrect, and we'll hopefully we will get time to correct that. So just to assure you that there's many residents who support you, and we thank you for all your time and effort. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else. Does someone else have a view that I can't get? I don't see any.
There are no other hands raised.
Okay. So then let's move on to the next item, which is the town attorney update on the Brown Act cease and desist notice. And that will be Cara Silver. Thank you so much for coming.
Hi there. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Cara Silver. I typically don't staff the WPC meetings, but I thank you for allowing me to attend this meeting, and I would like to give you some background on a cease and desist notice that this committee received on March 30th, quite some time ago at this point. So what I'd like to do is just provide an overview of the cease and desist notice that we received, give you an overview of what the town has been doing to address it thus far, and then provide some information on what you can expect to see in terms of next steps going forward with this particular action. Also, as a general caveat, this is not a Brown Act training at this point. The town clerk and I do recognize that committees need some Brown Act training. We have typically done that on a regular basis. COVID has obviously put a monkey wrench in that, but we will pick up Brown Act training, and we are coming up with a process for rolling it out. We may go directly to the committees and give each of the committees a time to ask questions and go through some examples with each individual committees, or we may have a town-wide Brown Act training or some other method. I'd be interested in hearing any input from you all as to how you would like to receive this information. It can be a little dry, and it also is very fact intensive. And so it's helpful to have an interactive process, which is why I generally like to do these types of trainings in smaller groups, but I'm open to other formats as well. So let's just turn to the cease and desist notice that was attached to your packet. The town received that on March 30th, and it relates to allegedly multiple Brown Act violations committed by the WPC on March 1st, 2022, and on other unspecified dates. The notice was served by two separate law firms, and they represent a group of residents, including Rusty Day, who I believe is on the call today, Kristen Day, Ron Eastman, Bruce Roberts, Shirley Roberts, James Rooney, Jim Vernazza, and Ellen Vernazza. In addition, the notice contained a a Public Records Act request seeking 4 separate categories of documents relative to the alleged Brown Act violations. So I wanted to separately discuss the 2 aspects of this request. First of all, there's the Brown Act allegations, and then secondly, there is the Public Records Act request. So with respect to the Brown Act, several people have asked me whether the Brown Act is applicable to boards and committees. The Brown Act is typically applicable to legislative bodies, and since this particular committee does not actually adopt legislation, that's the town council's role. Some committee members have asked whether the Brown Act is applicable to committee members. And it is. The reason why the Brown Act is applicable to this particular committee is because the town council created the committee and appointed the members and have directed the committee to report to the town council and provide advice to the town council. So that is really the definition of a Brown Act body. It is applicable to you all because you are appointed by the council and are reporting directly to the town council. The central provision of the Brown Act is that it requires that all meetings, and that meetings is certainly a term of art under the Brown Act, but all meetings of a legislative body be open and public. The Brown Act also requires that agendas be published in advance of the hearing so that the public can familiarize themselves with the topics of business that are going to be discussed at the meeting. And another key aspect of the Brown Act is that the public be permitted to comment on each item of the agenda. So in regard to the particular allegations relating to this complaint, I have had several communications with the 2 sets of attorneys that are representing the residents. And the complaint is not entirely clear as to what particular violation they are claiming has been made, and why the particular violation or conduct violates the Brown Act. What it appears to be is that the claimants believe that texting during a meeting violates the Brown Act. It's not clear whether the contention is that if you text anybody, that's a violation. It's not clear whether you need to be texting public officials or whether you need to be texting committee members. What happens if a text comes in and you respond to it from a member of the public? Is that a Brown Act violation? all of this is not discussed in the Brown Act. The claim is not spelled out, and so it really is questionable. I'm hearing some background. What we do know is that the Brown Act really relates to, there are two important aspects of the Brown Act that are implicated here. First of all, there is the definition of a quorum. And a quorum is a majority of the official legislative body. So if you have 7 members on your body, your quorum is 4 members. The Brown Act precludes clearly 4 members from communicating outside of a meeting, whether that communication is you all getting together in a room and talking. If there's a quorum and it's not a publicly noticed meeting, that violates the Brown Act. If you instead are all talking on the phone or on Zoom or in a group email chat or a group text, that also clearly violates the Brown Act. What is a little bit more complicated is what the concept of a serial meeting. So a serial meeting can take place in 2 different ways. First of all, you can have what is called a daisy chain serial meeting. And that is, remember those old games of telephone where one person has a conversation with person 2, and then person 2 talks to person 3 and relays some of the conversation that they've had with person 1. Then person 3 has a conversation with person 4 and relays part of the conversation that has taken place between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. That is a typical daisy chain, and it is called a serial meeting. And if the substance of the conversation during that serial meeting relates to a matter of business that is within the purview of the particular body, it violates the Brown Act. The other type of serial meeting you can have is called a hub and spoke. A hub and spoke, and generally when I do Brown Act training, I draw these things on the board, but I'm not going to do that right now. But so with a hub and spoke, you have a person who is in the center, and they have a conversation with somebody else, and then somebody else on the committee. Then they understand how that committee member is going to vote. Then the person in the middle, and then typically with a hub and spoke type of violation, the person in the middle is not on the committee. So it's typically a staff member, or sometimes a developer who is seeking to get a project through the council. So the person in the middle has a conversation with committee member 1, then has a subsequent conversation with committee number 2, and so on and so forth, so that there are 4 separate conversations with 4 committee members. That's a quorum. And in each of those conversations, information is shared about how other people on the committee are voting and what their concerns are. And so the hub in this case is trying to be an intermediary to gain a collective concurrence of the other 4 members. So that is called the hub and spoke aspect of a serial meeting. That is also clearly prohibited under the Brown Act. Now, there is no allegation that occurred at the March 1st meeting. Instead, there was a screen share that was made and a series of text showed up on the screen share. There was one text with one person, one other committee member on a topic. That's 2 people. At the time, the quorum was 5, so you don't have a quorum on that. Then the same committee member had a subsequent conversation with somebody else on the committee about another subject. Again, just 2 people, not a Brown Act violation. So that is how we analyze the claim. We do not believe that there was a Brown Act violation based on the information that we have reviewed. That being said, I will say that texting during meetings is, it's not a great practice. Public members view it as disrespectful sometimes. It certainly is annoying to hear, public officials' cell phones going off and beeping and receiving text messages. And, in the age of Zoom, there are new etiquettes that have started to evolve. And we as city attorneys do advise our public bodies that it is not a best practice to use your cell phone during the meeting to communicate to one another. That being said, it does not violate the Brown Act if there is a limited amount of communication, and that's really just the reality of public meetings. If you watched or if you attended public meetings when they were at the schoolhouse in person, you will frequently see, officials, they lean over and they talk to, the person on the other side of them, and they have a question about the staff report and they don't want to interrupt the staff presentation because and so they ask their partner next to them, their colleague next to them, or sometimes there's a question that a council member or a committee member has for a staff member, and so they walk over and they ask the staff member. There's lots of action and that type of interaction that occurs at a public meeting that doesn't violate the Brown Act. It's a long accepted practice that those types of communications take place, and they have to take place for a smooth running meeting. However, if those communications implicate a quorum and the quorum of people are all talking about the same subject, then that is a Brown Act violation. And so that's why we always advise, if you're going to be talking about a matter that is before the body, just talk to one person. There's never going to be a Brown Act violation if you can just pick a Brown Act buddy for that particular topic. So that really covers the Brown Act piece of the notice. Why don't I break now and you can ask questions, and then I will go into the public records aspect of the notice, if that's okay with you, Chair Hammer.
So is there any questions from the committee members? Wanda.
You said the public is allowed to comment. My question is, in advance at the time of the meeting or after the fact?
Yes, that's a good question. After in connection with the particular agenda item. So on the WPC agenda, you will have, items 1, 2, 3, 4. The public has the ability to comment on each one of the noticed agenda items.
Yeah, but my question is when? When do they get to comment?
Right. So that's up to the chair. It's up to procedures. Generally, the way our committees work is that there's a staff presentation. Then the officials, the committee members ask questions, and then the public comments, and then there's a discussion.
Cara, to be clear though, I believe, does the Brown Act not require public comment before any action is taken?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. So before the vote is taken, the public has the ability to comment.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. So if I wanted to send an email out to the committee, hey, does anyone have anything for next month's agenda? Or the wildfire fair is next month. Just to be clear, this is our schedule. Is that a violation, or because, do I have to say, do not respond, do not reply all?
Right. So we're getting into some pretty technical issues and best practices that you know, are kind of beyond the scope of this particular presentation. What I try to do though is if you're just distributing information and you're not requesting a reply, that's generally fine to send to more than a quorum. However, if you editorialize on that information that you send out, and if that information is going to be related to a topic before your committee, that could be a problem. We don't recommend that. And the type of information that gets distributed out to committee members, where you would expect committee members to, if you're asking for particular feedback from committee members, that really should come from staff, and staff should lead that effort to avoid Brown Act issues.
Okay, so let's take questions from the residents. David Cardinal.
Yes, I'm blown away by this whole discussion. I think our town does a great job on average, and the notion that some members of a committee that doesn't really vote on legislation should be held accountable for a couple text messages, I think is, first of all, insane. And then I also wonder if it's just part of an effort to make a chilling effect on people who really want to do the best for the town, and scare them out of serving on the committees, which we've seen plenty of people resigning, so that other people can advance a particular partisan agenda. I just find it nuts, and I just don't see any rationale for a Brown Act violation for a wildfire committee in a tiny town in the middle of somewhere. And I hope that can be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, so Cara, you want to continue? I don't think
Sure. Thanks. So the second part of the notice relates to public records that are maintained by the town. So it asks for 4 different categories of documents. It targets a couple of officials in particular, and asks for emails and text messages from those particular officials. And the under the Brown Act, under the Public Records Act, the town is responsible for maintaining some public records, for maintaining the bulk of the public records. There are certain documents that are not subject to the Public Records Act, and there are other documents that the town keeps in the ordinary course of business, but are privileged. And so those documents need not be turned over. Under the process for asking for a public record is that you really can ask for any type of record, assuming that it's not exempt from a Public Records Act or privileged. And then the town has 10 days to respond as to whether the document is exempt or is privileged, and whether the town will comply with the Public Records Act request. Then you can ask for an extension if the documents are not easily locatable. So the town responded that they would produce documents. They had some documents, and they would review the documents and produce any documents that were not exempt or privileged. The Public Records Act contains no timeline for producing documents. From just a practical standpoint, if every resident asked staff to search for documents and spend all of their time searching for documents, there could be no city business conducted. So obviously, staff members need to prioritize Public Records Act processing requests. The town has been recently has received several different requests. Many larger towns have a staff person that is dedicated to just responding to Public Records Act requests. This town does not have that. We need to rely on our existing staff. And so they try to fit these duties into their schedules as best they can. So we have provided several different productions to the attorneys for these residents. The other tricky aspect of this request is that it asks for both text messages and email messages from committee members and from a certain employee and a certain council member. So messages that are sent through the town's email program live on the town server, and those are easy to, not easy, but those are searchable and we can obtain access to those. But texts are not sent through the town server. And as you know, some people keep their texts messages, some people don't. It's a personal preference. Once a text message is deleted from your own personal device, it's very hard to obtain it because you don't have access to the server that it was stored on originally, unlike emails. So the other tricky aspect of this request is that the committee members whose emails and text messages were requested, some of them are no longer on the committee. Even those committee members who are on the committee, they're volunteers and they're sending these messages from their personal devices. So the town doesn't really have the ability to go in and demand that, town volunteers give up their personal devices so that we can search through them and obtain responsive emails and text messages. So that being said, as the committee members who were on the committee as of March 1st, as you know, I did send out some messages to you all, and thank you to people who have responded. We have gone through those emails and text messages, and we have or will produce the documents that we have received so far. We have not received emails and texts from all committee members who were on the committee as of March 30th. So it's difficult. So that's going to be difficult to fully comply with, but we are using our best efforts on that. So so that's the Public Records Act portion of this. Why don't I just go through next steps, and then I can take another set of questions on the Public Records Act and next steps if you like. In terms of next steps, even though I had indicated to the attorneys that I would be producing additional documents and also given them the reality, kind of a reality check for when these documents are going to be produced. Obviously, we have staffing resource constraints. We had a couple of COVID incidents, and so there was some delays there. Our town clerk, as you know, recently retired, and we have been onboarding a new town clerk. So there have been a series of obstacles in producing these documents, but we still plan on doing that. And I made that very clear and communicated that to the attorneys. But they elected, instead of waiting to receive those emails, they elected to file a lawsuit. So they have filed a lawsuit against this committee, the Wildfire Protection Committee, Wildfire, Wildfire, what are you called?
Preparedness Committee.
Preparedness Committee, thank you.
Just say WPC.
Yeah, okay, I like that better, yes. There are so many committees in Portola Valley, it's hard to keep them all straight, but so they filed a lawsuit, and the next step is then to the lawsuit claims that there's not a adequate production of documents, and we can, debate that with the judge as to whether there is a particular time frame under the Public Records Act for producing documents, and the judge can decide. And then the second issue is the Brown Act issue. And so there is a process for trying to voluntarily cure a Brown Act issue. We had early discussions about that. And again, it was unclear what the attorneys were seeking in terms of the Brown Act, what type of conduct they wanted this committee to adhere to. And it was difficult for them to articulate and provide citations for why just a single text during a meeting violated the Brown Act. So those meetings were not very successful, although there is a process to try to resolve that out of court. However, since the lawsuit has been filed, that process is no longer available to this committee. The process was also, of course, stymied by the fact that legally the committee couldn't meet because there wasn't a quorum. And this is the first meeting that you've had. So of course, the residents who filed the lawsuit, took advantage of that aspect and sought to file a lawsuit. So that's where we are. And that piece of the lawsuit will also go before the judge. And the judge will determine what conduct is being complained about and whether there was in fact a violation. And if so, what is the remedy? And with Brown Act lawsuits, you don't get damages if the body doesn't comply. Instead, the court will issue an order telling the commission how to comply in a way that comports with the Brown Act. So at worst case, we would get an order that says don't text during meetings, and hopefully that that order would give the parameters, don't text a quorum of members, and would provide direction on who you can text, who you can't text, that type of thing. So happy to answer additional questions on those two aspects.
Yeah, Craig?
Yeah, one slight modification to what Kara said. I think that is the impact of the judgment. There is a potential financial implication for the town as well. If the judge decides to, he can award attorney's fees for the plaintiff. So the town potentially could have to cover the attorney's fees for any party that is making a claim under the Brown Act as well.
Yes.
But that would be only if, we're found to have done something wrong that would justify that. So we don't believe we're risking that here, but it is a potential in future cases if you guys do bad stuff.
And the town has to hire litigation counsel to defend the lawsuit. So there is an out-of-pocket expense associated with that as well.
Any other questions from committee members? I have a question. So is this going to be on our agenda every month, or is this kind of it for a while?
So that's a good question. I don't think it certainly won't be a regular briefing. If something happens in the litigation, I will brief you. We could do that either through a confidential memo that I send to you, since it involves active litigation. If the council instructs that memo be made public, because some of the other residents may also be interested in this litigation, I could, issue a public memo or a public staff report. It's also possible, if there is a juncture in the litigation where this committee needs to make a decision about something, we could go into a closed session to discuss that. Or we could even have an open session, and the petitioners who filed the lawsuit could also be there to hear what advice we are giving with respect to the litigation.
Is there any, oh yes, MJ, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, since Rusty Day is filing the lawsuit, and since everything we discuss here is strategy or information or whatever, are we required that he be allowed to attend the meetings?
Yes. So yes, he is allowed to attend. This is a publicly noticed meeting. He is allowed to attend. He's allowed to make comment on this particular agenda item. If we decide that there is a legal issue that needs to be discussed with the committee in a confidential setting, there is an ability to go into what I refer to as a closed session. And that would only involve this committee and the attorney representing you and the town. And we could discuss strategy in a more confidential format. Rusty and anybody else who would like to comment before we go into closed session would have the ability to do that. But if we did make the proper finding that it was appropriate for closed session, would not be able to join the closed session.
Okay. Is there any questions from the people attending? From Dudley? Yes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I would like to echo what Dave Cardinal said from a slightly different angle. I appreciate the concerns of the people who are involved in this legal procedure from outside the committee, whether it's because they disagree with the committee's work or with the way the committee is interacting with the town or with other committees. But this town desperately needs volunteers in order to be able to function. it needs to feel that this is a community, meaning neighbors helping neighbors. And if we fight with each other, sue each other, etc., our choice becomes, do we want to pay much higher taxes in order to hire twice as many staff members to handle the business that volunteers do? Because people will not volunteer if they're put in the position of, for example, having to search through all of their emails and texts. And I think it's too bad that we've reached a point where people are this angry with each other. And I think we all need to stop and take a deep breath and think about what the objective of this process is. This committee's function is preventing wildfire from harming the community. And you folks on the committee have done an enormous amount of work to that end, for which thank you. And I just hope going forward that you can be allowed to do what you're there to do without further frustration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. So the caller, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your name. Please forgive me. Your phone number 6. Oh, you're gone. Okay.
Nope, she's still there. Caroline.
Yeah, Caroline. Okay, Caroline. I'm so. Caroline, are you there? No. Okay, David, you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. To echo what Dudley said, I just think that we need to take a step back and look at what we're trying to solve. And Brown Act violations are not what we're trying to solve. And the committee is doing a really good job. And the people who are trying to trivialize that into some sort of legal, like, minutia, I think that's, I don't get how that happens. So I'm hopeful we can up-level it and get back to dealing with how our community deals with fire, the threat of fire, and evacuation and planning for fire. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, I think that's it. We lost the other caller. So I'm going to move on. And thank you, Cara, for coming today so much. Okay, so approval of the minutes.
Jennifer, I saw that Carolyn's hand went down and came back up, so she may be back.
Carolyn, caller from 678-7562.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I agree with the previous residents, but they have to know that this has been coming. I mean, we have warned town council for the last couple of years what was going on, and we tried to prevent it. I do have a question for town council Silver. Because we have had some closed sessions, and I believe you just told us that the public has the opportunity to ask questions. And
Carolyn, we're losing you. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
We've lost her.
Can we mute that? Okay. What do we do in this circumstance? Just continue?
I'm sorry, my phone, it seems like my phone is being hacked. It's difficult enough, and I apologize. I need to access it by computer. I will turn off my phone because actually someone intercepted this, obviously, and I apologize. It's not my doing. So I hope you received my comments, and I would like to have an answer from the town council if it's possible. Thank you.
Caroline, I don't think we heard your specific question for Cara, if you'd like to repeat it.
Sure. We have had a few town closed sessions just recently. And I thought that I just heard from Town Council Silver that the public has an opportunity to comment. And I have not seen that. So I wanted to see if that was if I misunderstood or if that was an error that was done in the past or what. So yes, I would like to have some clarifications on that.
Sure. Hi, Carolyn. So the way we typically notice closed sessions on town council agendas is they come at the end of the meeting, and there's an agenda item for them. And the mayor will typically announce that agenda item and ask for comments. And the public does have the opportunity to comment on the item. Sometimes the item is not, there's no staff report attached. There's no public discussion or presentation about the closed session item. So sometimes you don't necessarily know the full breadth of what is being discussed. But for instance, there is an item on if there's a pending lawsuit. If this lawsuit were discussed, we would state the name of the litigation. The mayor would call the item and give the public an opportunity to talk about anything relating to the litigation before the council goes into closed session. So yes, you do have the opportunity to do that.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let's move into approval of the minutes for March 1st. Does anyone have any corrections? Okay, do I have to take a vote to approve them? Yes.
Yes.
Can I see a show of hands?
And it needs to be by a roll call because of the online nature. The law requires a roll call. So each person needs to say whether they approve or not.
So we're going to take a roll call to approve the minutes from March 1st. Wanda?
Well, since I wasn't at that meeting,
No, but they're attached to the agenda.
I know. Okay, I read them. I don't have any comments because I wasn't at the meeting. So if you need my approval, you've got it.
MJ?
Yes.
Okay, Dee?
Yes.
Noah? Nona?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, and I approve them. Okay, we're approved. Okay, so subcommittee updates, and I want to take a second for the new members because this wasn't done when I joined the committee and I was very confused. So at some point, we're going to send you out a committee charter, which, by the way, Craig I do not have an updated copy of. So
I do. I'll share one with you.
Great. So a subcommittee, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a subcommittee is created so that a member or a small group of members can work on something offline and they don't have to take up the committee's time, and discuss every single thing during the meetings. And right now there are 2 subcommittees, and these were recently recreated to combine subcommittees. So one of the subcommittees is home hardening and vegetation management, and that is chaired by MJ. And the other subcommittee is finance and insurance, which you're going to hear more about in a few minutes. So those are the 2 subcommittees on the within the Wildfire Preparedness Committee. The Wildfire Preparedness Fair, D, I don't know if that was on your radar, but that was a couple weeks ago. And that is not a subcommittee, it's just an event that the committee sponsored. Okay, so with that, MJ, do you want to give us an update to the Wildfire Preparedness Fair? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the fair. I'm talking about the fair.
Okay, so the packet included our report. And it's an interesting read. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, you'll be fascinated. We have set the next date for next year, and I think it's on Earth Day next year. So we are hoping that Nona will help us maybe get the Conservation Committee going with us and put a little spin on the fair next year and highlight climate change with the Wildfire Fair. And we think it's going to be a great little educational possibility and maybe get some kids involved from school. MJ and I are both working on the fair again next year. We're just going to divide the work a little differently. We are going to include lectures next year, and MJ will be deciding who those lecturers will be. She'll be deciding any kind of content as far as wildfire technical content, because she really is our resident wildfire expert on this committee. She has an incredible amount of knowledge. And then I'll be focusing more on the organizational, the documentation, contacting the companies. And so throughout the next few months, you'll get little updates, but I don't want to spend too much time right now because we have so many other really important things to touch. But as we get closer in April next year, we will be giving you reports and you'll have a chance to give your input. MJ, do you have anything else to add?
No, I guess, well, I guess after we're done talking about it, do we take public comments? And I'd like to hear people's, if they have any input while we're all online.
Okay. Nona?
Yeah, so I just want to say that 5 members of the Conservation Committee staffed the conservation table at the fair. We thought it was wonderful, and at the committee's last meeting, we're very enthusiastic about participating again next year. So I don't know what kind of coordination we really need to think about, but certainly I'll bring that back to the Conservation Committee, your suggestion, and we'll report back next month.
Thank you so much. And the emergency committee was also there, and Bud and Rob and Dale were there, and that was amazing to have them. And the fire district showed up not only with their fire engine, but with so many firefighters. It was so cool watching the little kids talking to the firefighters. It was just a wonderful event. And I would normally talk about it a lot more. It's 5 o'clock and I want to be sensitive to your time. Okay. And now we're gonna, oh, I'm so sorry. Is there any comments from the people attending on the Wildfire Fair? Okay. Oh, Dudley.
Just a big bravo. There was a lot of good information, and we've gotten a number of questions based on what people saw there that they want more information about. So thank you very much for a great job.
Thank you, Dudley. And thank you for all your help. Dudley was our volunteer, and she made such a difference. She stayed right to the end helping us clean up, and it was, she's just wonderful.
Yeah, Dudley was great. Jennifer, I just have a little thing to report on the what we were calling the Ready for Wildfire Sprint.
And so now we're moving into the home hardening subcommittee. So
okay.
And,
all right.
And MJ, why don't you also tell the new members what the R4W sprint is? And also, I know Nona mentioned the Canyon report.
Yeah.
And those are both things that are within your committee. And also you could talk about your wildfire tips, because they may not know that that's something you also produce every week.
Yeah. Okay. So on the Ready for Wildfire Sprint, that was the, the name that we gave it. Originally, we called it a pilot project. The whole idea was to get a street, identify a street where the whole neighborhood would try to do home hardening and defensible space together, and they would pool their collective bargaining or whatever ability, so that service providers would be incentivized to come in and do the whole street. So for example, Jennifer Hammer got a couple of vendors who were willing to give a at cost service for vents for that whole neighborhood. So the neighborhood that volunteered was Alhambra Court off of Golden Oak, and Trisha Christensen was the neighborhood leader for that. There were 9 houses on that street, so it was a good ideal size. It didn't, to my eye, it didn't have a lot of problems, but it turned out that 7 of the 9 went and got assessments from the fire district, and actually the score was a little rough. And I talked to Jennifer today, and she said that Jennifer Eustra today, and she said that she thinks that 2 of the 7 did some work, but what she said is that she will do a whole survey, ask people, what they did, how the town or this committee could help them more. And she will report formally on this project in July at our July meeting. So that's what I have to say on that. On the Canyon report, Jennifer Eustra was also the leader behind that. So I don't know, Nona, if you're interested in our continuing to pursue that, it needs a champion. It's clearly not me. So I would put that up to the committee. But
So,
right now, no one's working on it with Jennifer.
Actually, I've been working on it. So,
well, I mean, okay.
And
I'm
I
sorry.
sort of inherited it from Jennifer Eustra. So at the next meeting, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Great. Oh,
So,
that's wonderful.
So on this topic, I'm a great believer in giving presentations, brief presentations, and making sure we get a couple things done every month. So I love this idea of doing that. So would Nona, if Jennifer Eustra wants to present on the R4W sprint, which by the way was a really important project, I don't know if it came across, but this idea of, can we somehow create an umbrella that we can give a neighborhood some instructions, and a leader in the neighborhood can gather a group of their neighbors together, and they have a template. Okay, let's clean up the vegetation. Let's get the ember resistant vents. We know this contractor will give us a discount. Is that going to be an effective tool? So this was a really important project. And so she's interested in presenting next month. Nona, would you like to give us an update on the Canyon report in August?
Sure. I'd be happy to. I think that, it's really needed by people sooner than that, but, now is the time when people should be heeding the guidance.
Okay.
But August is fine.
And we're going to try to keep these presentations to 10, 15 minutes, and then lots of questions. Okay. Any questions from the committee about what we just talked about? Wanda.
You're talking about a specific canyon or canyons in general?
Canyons in general.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Dee?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you need help, I think probably the home hardening subcommittee would be more of my expertise. So just feel free to call.
Well, and I will be calling you, I guarantee you. But yes, that's just that is great news. And we'll probably be wanting your participation in the wildfire fair too. That is so exciting. Thank you. Okay, is there any questions from the community? Nope. Okay. So I'm going to give a presentation. It is brief. It is, I think you will find it interesting. And I'm going to do my screen share. Hold on here. Let me play. Can everybody see that? Yes? Okay. So this presentation is from it's by the Finance and Insurance Subcommittee, and the subject is Portola Valley Fire Mitigation Funding. And to give you a little background, the Finance and Insurance Subcommittee was just created this last January. And the purpose of the committee was to determine potential sources of funding to implement any fire mitigation programs adopted by the town council. So in March of this year, I gave the first presentation by the subcommittee, and I listed the short-term goal of the subcommittee was to provide a baseline report on current Portola Valley funding for fire mitigation. And the first part of this presentation is that quick little baseline report. The long-term goal that I gave in March was to discuss possible fire mitigation programs and projects and provide ballpark estimates of program costs. That long-term goal has changed slightly, and that change will be the subject of the second part of my presentation. So for those of you that have never had the pleasure of perusing a Portola Valley budget, you can find one on the town website, and you go to the tab for departments, and then you go to finance. And when you open the finance page, you will see the current budget as well as past budgets. And when you open the budget, you'll see categories. The one category you will not see is the actual Woodside Fire Protection District finances, because you have to go to the woodsidefire.org website to find that. And the reason for that is we pay the fire district for property taxes, and those are sent directly from the county, is my understanding. So that money never goes through the town budget, so it's not listed in our town budget. One of the categories in our town budget is called fire services, and it has two subcategories: fire prevention and fire mitigation. And fire mitigation is the subject of today's presentation. But I do want to mention, before I go any farther, that every year the town has many expenditures that are related to fire safety. For example, you'll find a category called dispatch services, and that pays for our 911 response call. And we spent $66,129 on that this year. And it may not be under fire services, but obviously it's vital to our safety when it comes to wildfire. We also this year spent $60,000 on a consultant for the safety element. We spent $57,000 on a radio antenna installation at Cal Water Station. And we spent $75,000 on engineering support for evacuation planning. So all these items are very related to fire safety and wildfire safety, but you're not going to find them listed under that category of fire services. Under the subcategory of fire prevention, you're going to find two programs that are funded under that subcategory. One is the CERP program, which stands for Citizen Emergency Response and Preparedness Program. And you might know the two programs it funds, the WPV Ready and the WPV CERP program. And the other program that is financed under this subcategory is our chipper program. So in 2020 to 2021, we spent $63,732 on that subcategory. And in this budget cycle, we spent $76,700. And when you look at the two programs that were funded, about 22,000 was spent on SERP and about 55,000 was spent on the chipper program. The reason I say about is that those two programs are not specifically listed in the budget. So I had to get those numbers from a different document. So under this fire mitigation subcategory, and I should note, this is a brand new subcategory. It just came into existence last year. So in 2020 to 2021, we spent $171,000 under this subcategory. And we spent $151,000 that year on a fire mitigation engineer. My understanding is that this was a consultant from the fire district. And Don could, I'm sure, speak to this better than I could, but they consulted on many things, but one of the things that came out of that was our Portola Valley right-of-way project. So last year we started that program and spent $20,000 on it last year. This year, the fire mitigation category was funded at $190,000, and all of that money was used on the Portola Valley right-of-way project. And this is a big deal. This is our first real fire mitigation program. It is exciting. And what's even more exciting is the proposed budget for next year has actually increased the budget by about $60,000 or $70,000, I believe. So I'm going to talk about this program really briefly. It's a 5-year program. And it is a joint project by the fire district and Portola Valley. The fire district is contracted to specify the work and to perform the work. The PV Public Works Department just manages the road safety and notification. And the program prioritizes vegetation management on the town's right of way. So that means the evacuation routes, it means anything near an emergency gate or near infrastructure. And this program includes trimming the trees from the road up 14.5 feet. And that's primarily to accommodate emergency vehicles. It's also going to prevent ignition of a potential wildfire. It's going to increase visibility, and it's going to improve evacuation routes. Also part of this program is to produce and maintain shaded fuel breaks. And part of this is to identify hazardous trees and fuels for future removal. This project right now does not include a lot of tree removal, although I did speak to Jeremy and he did indicate that if they find a particularly egregious tree, they will take it down. If they identify a tree that's near a utility line, they're going to contact PG&E. So this year, in this budget cycle, we spent about $245,000 on fire mitigation, $190,000 on the Portola Valley right-of-way project, and then I'm going to include $55,000 on the chipper program. Yes, and I know that the chipper program is technically under that subcategory of fire prevention, but I really think it should be under fire mitigation because it is a fuel reduction program, and I feel pretty strongly about that. So this is a huge step for Portola Valley, and it's great that we've spent this money, and $245,000 is a lot of money. But we still have to ask, are we doing enough? And the town council has also asked that question. And they are looking to our committee for a recommendation. They are asking us is there an additional fire mitigation program or project that makes sense for Portola Valley? And if so, how do we fund it? So our goal is to investigate a possible 10-year fire mitigation program. And I said 10 years because I really feel we need the flexibility of this timeline if we're looking at, you know, a possible solution. We really need to look at a 10-year horizon. Any program would need to fundamentally improve wildfire risks in Portola Valley, and it would need to make financial sense. And that's a big bullet point. It really needs to make financial sense for our town. We have to be able to afford it. And it would also have to have the support of residents, the fire district, and the town management. So this program might include a fire district-wide ballot measure. It could include a Portola Valley ballot measure. It could include a multi-year program or project proposal for the next budget cycle, which would be 2023 or 2024. But anything that we propose would need to include the existing fire mitigation and fire services that we currently fund. We're not trying to replace that. So the milestones would be essentially for us to ask ourselves that fundamental question: is there an additional fire mitigation program or project that makes sense? And that would be something we look at this year. We have a lot of other things that we need to address, but I think that if we look at this a little bit every month, we'll be able to do that. And then if the answer is yes, and you determine that there is something out there that makes sense for us, we would create a proposal for a 10-year fire mitigation program, including a possible funding source. And this would be something that the Finance and Insurance Subcommittee would take as a long-term goal for next year. So we would be creating that proposal. So in order to address the first milestone, which is asking the fundamental question, I am proposing that we, either in July or August, discuss with or have a presentation by the fire district on Portola Valley wildfire risks and how to reduce them. Because I think we have to start by listening to the experts to tell us where the problem is and where we should focus. And I have not asked Don about this, but I'm hoping that he has not logged off when he sees this milestone. And then also in July or August, I'm going to give a big picture summary on programs and projects that we might consider. And that will be a very big picture summary of every program or project that I can think of that we might want to consider, and then we can focus in. But we really want to start with an open mind. And then we'll just start discussing programs and projects and their impact. And we're just going to get a lot of input from residents and the town management and the fire district. We could have presentations on programs implemented by other cities, and then we'll look at their possible budgets. So budget will come into this. We will slowly discuss budget as we move along. And we could have possible speakers who have firsthand knowledge of programs that we are discussing. Basically, this committee is going to drive this process, because as you start to indicate where you think we should go, that is what we'll focus on. And with that, I will stop screen sharing. Does anyone have any questions? Really? Nothing? Don, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up.
No, I didn't have a question, but Your presentation was great, and it's going to be a good segue into my update. So I think I'll just wait until I give my update, and I think
Does that mean that we can plan that in July you will give that presentation for us?
I have it ready today. I'm planning on doing it today. Yeah.
I'm shocked. Okay. No one on the committee has any question? Okay. Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy Dennis, Town Manager. Just to say thank you to Jennifer. Appreciated the last few months where you've been working very diligently through these financial issues, which are, needless to say, pretty complicated at times, and appreciated the interaction over that time. So thank you.
Jeremy has been very generous with his time. Would anyone from the community like to ask a question? Okay. Well, then let's go right up to Don.
Okay, you guys are ready? Do I have the ability to share my screen?
You should.
Good, right? Yeah.
Yep, maybe you should.
Yeah, at the bottom it says share screen.
Okay, you guys can see that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a good segue, Jennifer, because you know, one of the things that the district is planning on doing, and a lot of you know this, is that we're doing a hazard and risk assessment, comprehensive hazard and risk assessment of the fire district. And one of the things that will do is it's going to show us where we can make a difference with our mitigation. It'll point out areas where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak. And it'll show us where we can reduce risk within the district. That's one of the things that it's going to do. I have a presentation on that hazard and risk assessment. We're at the point now where I'm just working on writing up the RFP to send it out to the consultants. That's going to happen here within the next week. And I want to give you an idea of what I believe the assessment, the risk assessment should encompass, and some of the ideas that came out of the advisory committee meetings that I had with other fire professionals, fire ecologists, and fire analysts. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with this presentation, and then I'll talk about, at the end of this, I'll talk about some other things that we're working on with the Cpa group, which is our partners up in Montana, which would be a direct correlation to some of the future financing that you were talking about, Jennifer. So this PowerPoint presentation was created from the research done and discussions had with the various different fire professionals, community members, fire ecologists, and fire behavior analysts. It was created to stimulate further discussion on what we collectively agree upon would be the most prudent methodology for assessing the Woodside Fire Protection District. This is one proposed strategy that may still be refined to better the final delivery based on other professional and expert advice. So in thinking about the objectives and goals of the district's hazard and risk assessment, it's important to recognize that the district's fire ecosystem presents very specific and difficult challenges. The district is not a lightly populated national or state forest, nor is it a densely populated urbanized neighborhood with multiple evacuation routes situated on the edge of open space wildland. Rather, our district is heavily vegetated, relatively confined, fire-prone terrain with a fairly large population of individual homes and people spread across the district, often in close proximity to one. Consequently, fire has the potential to expand and spread very rapidly over large distances into populated neighborhoods with great intensity. The population has limited evacuation routes, constrained and often inadequate evacuation capacity, an incomplete and vulnerable communications infrastructure, and little prior organization, preparation, training, and experience with rapid evacuations. In view of our particular ecosystem and challenges, I believe the district wildfire hazard and risk assessment that we're preparing should be designed to help the district serve the following important objectives, and this is in priority order. Protect the population within and immediately surrounding the district. Protect district personnel and others responding to incidents within or surrounding the district. Protect essential infrastructure, resources, and property within the district. Identify and prioritize fuel mitigation opportunities to reduce risk, which is what Jennifer was talking about, and to educate the district's population and its leaders. Based on these overriding objectives, I believe the wildfire hazard and risk assessment must provide the information and tools necessary to address at least 4 critical questions. Worst case scenario, when an incident occurs, how can fire from that incident expand and spread under the prevailing and expected conditions at the time? And a likely scenario, how fast, how far, in what directions, and with what intensity will that spread likely occur? Obviously, this depends on the conditions prevailing at the time of the incident and is not knowable or predictable in advance. This is why the assessment should include a worst case assessment so we understand and prepare for the extreme case. Risk assessment, what lives, infrastructure, resources, and property would such spread and propagation likely affect? And for mitigation, what actions or steps will produce the greatest benefits in reducing existing and future wildfire hazards and risks? So if the overriding objective is to protect the population and the overriding goal is to enable public safety officials to comprehend both worst and likely case scenarios, then I believe the methods used to conduct the assessment and mapping should enable the district to estimate the extent, rate, and intensity of fire spread that can result from any given fuel complex. So in what directions, over what time periods, with what intensity can and will a given fire in a given fuel complex likely spread? Well, based on our prior discussions that we had in our advisory committee meetings, we had 2 different fire ecologists, as well as NIST's WUI structure parcel community hazard mitigation methodology that was outlined in their NT 2205 paper. And I believe the district should approach the hazard and risk assessment and mapping from 2 perspectives. First, from large to small scale, meaning outside in, so the community, to the parcel level, to the structure, applying the approach of CAL FIRE's wildfire hazard mapping and identifying and designating the areas within the district where, based on terrain and fuel sources, a fire incident would pose a very high, or moderate hazard of rapid propagation and uncontrolled spread. Mapping of very high and high fire severity areas identifies the areas within the district that are most susceptible and prone to rapid intensification and spread of fire. Second, we look at it from small to large scale, so inside out, from the structure to the parcel level and to the community. So applying NIST's NT 2205 methodology, we recognize that individual choices made at relatively small scale can dramatically affect the propagation and spread of fire within a built and vegetated environment. In such settings, the proximity of natural and man-made fuel sources to one another can rapidly intensify and spread a particular fire incident beyond control. So the goal is to identify, decouple, compartmentalize, and contain the important fuel sources within that fuel complex to prevent or protect against expansion and spread of fire. The district's populated fire ecosystem makes its built environment highly significant to the propagation and spread of fire within the district. As the NT 2205 paper makes clear, we cannot simply apply the long-standing forest fire paradigm of wildfire prevention and protection in unpopulated areas to the district's populated ecosystem. We need a new paradigm, one that accounts for the very high heat energy generated by burning structures and the critical role that radiant and convective heat flux play in propagating and spreading fire within populated neighborhoods. I also believe that existing mathematical models of fire behavior cannot accurately assess and predict the intensification or spread of fire in built environments such as the district's fire ecosystem. I also believe that the existing models will underestimate the likely intensity and spread of fire in such ecosystems, and that it will be years and perhaps decades before the research and study needed to build models that account reasonably well with the heat energy and the fire dynamics of populated neighborhoods in wildland settings will exist. So do we really want to continue building another 10 years worth of mistakes while we wait for the science? And more importantly, the existing models do not include any assessment or estimate of the heat energy contributed by burning man-made fuel sources and grossly underestimate the potential heat energy of fires burning in populated lands, and they fail to account for the effects that increased heat energy has on fire behavior. Is it really necessary to apply a mathematical model of fire behavior to our landscape to get a valid assessment of hazard and risk? I believe we can use a linear model, and that's what we should be applying. Basically, we can collect and validate the inputs needed to allow competent fire professionals to make informed, sound judgments and decisions, identify the important parameters, the terrain, the aspect, the fuels, the wind, that combine to cause the intensification and spread of fire, collect the best available data on each of those parameters, validate, analyze, and assemble that data in a readily useful and accessible manner, and then rely on experienced, competent professional judgment to integrate the data in order to predict how fire can or will likely behave under the conditions of a specific incident. In essence, this is exactly the approach taken by Ray Moritz in his 2008 assessment for Portola Valley. He collected the best available data on terrain, aspect, and fuels. He ground-proofed it and validated that data, and then integrated the various inputs, the terrain, the fuels, the population, evacuation routes, infrastructure, and then he depicted that data on one or more maps that can be used to facilitate the public safety and tactical judgments that must be made in any given incident. However, unlike the 2008 Moritz assessment, we now appreciate that structures and other man-made fuels are a critical component of the fuel complexes within populated lands. And such man-made fuels cannot be ignored or overlooked. And as NT 2205 points out, they must be managed at a very small scale in order to prevent rapid spread of fire within populated areas between existing or future structures. In addition to vegetative fuel types and locations on the landscape, the linear model should also catalog, categorize, and map the locations of structures and possibly other man-made fuel types on the landscape. The location, the density, and extent of structural and other man-made fuel sources should factor into the identification and categorization of the very high, the high, and the moderate hazard fire severity areas within the district. As you know, CAL FIRE did not do this in its initial hazard assessments in 2008. And that is one reason neighborhoods like Fountain Grove, Coffee Park, those areas were not recognized to be within the very high fire hazard severity areas. Developing the data sources and methods to locate categorize, and quantify the structural and other important man-made fuel sources on the landscape is an important priority and challenge. Assessing the impact of such fuel sources. Lost my place there. Way down at the bottom there. Sorry about that. Developing the data sources and methods to locate, categorize, and quantify the structural and other important man-made fuel sources on the landscape is an important priority and challenge. Assessing the impact of such fuel sources on fire behavior and dynamics is another important priority and challenge. During our advisory discussions, fire ecology experts several times made the point that at some level of analysis, there is a diminishing return on investment in ever greater precision or calibration of our inputs. As they stated, once the map turns red, making it more red provides little additional useful information. The question we are grappling with is not whether a very intense fire becomes even more intense, but rather the question we are grappling with is how the distribution, arrangement, and packaging of highly combustible fuel sources, such as structures within a neighborhood, will affect the speed and intensity of fire propagation and spread in that neighborhood. We need to comprehend the extent of areas at risk, as well as the nature and magnitude of hazards confronting them. The failure to recognize the magnitude of hazard confronting Fountain Grove or Coffee Park should stand as a reminder why better understanding of structure-to-structure fire spread in wildland environments is so desperately needed. If, as I and others believe, the potential magnitude and duration of heat energy generated by a burning structure is tens to hundreds or even thousands times greater than the heat energy of a comparable area of burning vegetation, we should certainly investigate and understand how that circumstance will affect the rate and intensity of local fire spread and its impact on successful evacuation and suppression in the surrounding area. While existing mathematical models should not be relied on to predict fire behavior or categorize fire hazards within populated areas such as the district, they can perhaps be adapted to provide a rough lower end check on the validity of assumptions and judgments made about the direction, the rate and intensity of spread in mapped areas of the district. For example, such models may be helpful to assess how changes in fuel conditions within an area could affect the expected direction, rate, and intensity of spread of fire under a range of anticipated conditions, or how the expected direction, rate, and intensity of spread of fire within a mapped area compares with the modeled direction, rate, and intensity of spread of fire in that area. In all such cases, it is the direction, the rate, and the intensity of spread of fire over time that is the critical output. Is it possible to categorize and identify areas within the district that pose categorically different degrees of hazard and risk for wildfire expansion and spread? Do discrete areas within the district truly pose different or significantly different levels of hazard for wildfire propagation and spread than other areas? If so, what purposes are served by identifying and mapping such areas? I believe there are at least three important reasons to do so. First, mitigate wildfire hazards by identifying where minimal fire safe standards must apply. The statutory and regulatory policies underlying CAL FIRE's strategic wildfire plan and its minimum fire safe development standards, as well as NIST's NT 2205 paper, clearly call for constraints on development where, if the district is serious about prioritizing the steps needed to reduce the risk of wildfire to our community, then CAL FIRE's strategic wildfire plan and its community risk reduction program clearly provide that the highest priority mitigation communities can take is the adoption of fire safe land use, development and building standards along the lines of CAL FIRE's minimum fire safe regulations, and NT 2205's methodology and NFPA 1140's wildland fire prevention standards. California law is clear. The district has the authority to adopt even more stringent fire prevention and protection standards than CAL FIRE's minimum standards based on its local assessment of hazard and risk. Secondly, to inform and educate the public and their leaders, the district has the experience, the competence, and the judgment to assess and identify the specific topographic and fuel conditions that create increased hazard of wildfire propagation and spread for the community. It is incumbent on the district's professionals to apply our competency and publicly share our judgment with the community and educate it about the steps needed to protect itself against extreme fire danger. And third, qualify for and obtain public and private funding to mitigate our hazards and risks. Under federal and state law, the ability of the district, its municipalities, and its residents is dependent in part on the level of wildfire hazard affecting our lands. So how will the district distinguish between very high, and moderately hazardous fuel complexes? What combinations of terrain and fuel sources, both natural and man-made, increase or intensify the propagation and spread of fire within the district? As NT 2205 points out, wildfire propagation and spread will likely occur by one of two principal mechanisms: ember showers or radiant or convective flux. This is where the rubber hits the road. By what criteria will the district delineate and differentiate between areas of elevated hazard? What criteria defines an area of very high fire hazard, and what constitutes an area of high fire hazard? Given the population, fire hazards, and potential evacuation needs of the district's fire ecosystem, I believe the most important public safety consideration for assessment of hazard should be the propensity for rapid propagation, spread, and intensification of fire. Those are the parameters that should concern us most, and those should be the parameters that delineate the areas of highest hazard. Again, as NT 2205 points out, and as the Coffee Park, Paradise, and the Marshall fire all demonstrate, the very highest hazards for rapid propagation and spread do not necessarily depend on fire-prone topography or dense vegetation. They also exist where man-made fuels are carelessly positioned and maintained in close proximity to one another and/or vegetative fuels, acting as though the hazards that matter are limited to the density of or proximity to vegetative fuels alone can lead to catastrophic results. So where within the lands of the district is it safe to assume that development need not apply the minimal safeguards of CAL FIRE's fire safe regulations or the guidance of NIST's NT 2205 and NFPA 1140? And that should be a very sobering question for all of us. So in addition to what we're planning on doing with the hazard and risk assessment and the inputs and the outputs that we want to get out of that, there are some other projects that we are working on with our Cpa group out of Montana. One of those would be, well, several of those would be social media coordinator for the fire district. It would be a grant funded social media coordinator. We're going to be working on updating the community plans for both towns to align with potential updated general plan goals. We're updating the land use codes for both towns to meet updated general plan goals and other community wildfire mitigation goals. We're looking at hiring a grant-funded grant writer to access state and federal funding sources. We're also considering, we're looking at doing a feasibility study of a ballot measure as a local, long-term, district-wide funding source for wildfire mitigation activities. And this falls right in line with what Jennifer was talking about in her presentation. Increasing education and outreach to facilitate fuel reduction and defensible space establishment at the parcel level and the benefits of home hardening. We're looking into increasing education and outreach in the evacuation process for the town, schools, and critical facilities. And input at the local level from Steve Quarles, who is an IBHS, former IBHS, and nation's leading expert on D-space, defensible space, and home hardening. And he's going to be helping us on the role of structure-to-structure spacing and community risk in light of the Senate Bill 9. So these are some of the things that the fire district is working on currently and ongoing. Stop sharing my screen here. Is there any questions?
So who on the committee has a question?
No
one?
questions.
Craig.
Thanks. Dawn, I'm just curious, you said that, and I know that Woodside Fire is looking at a potential ballot measure for a parcel tax or some funding source. You know, we've thought about it in Portola Valley, and this committee, I think, will continue looking at about doing a Portola Valley one. I've heard the county is looking at doing a county one. You know, obviously, I think we want to coordinate on all of this stuff because nobody likes raising taxes. Nobody likes paying higher taxes, and one ballot measure is more likely to succeed than 3 ballot measures. So I know that our town staff has been coordinating and working with you and thinking through this stuff, and this committee is going to continue working on it. So as that works its way through Woodside Fire, I think we'd be very interested in staying in the loop as to how it's progressing and so on. And we don't necessarily attend all your board meetings, and you guys don't necessarily attend all our council meetings, although you are at this meeting where probably the bulk of that would be progressing. So please keep us informed as that moves forward, and let us know, where the district is at, because if you do one, we don't want to do one too and step on each other's toes and split the vote as it might be. So thanks for that presentation. I think it was very helpful.
No, we're going to be connected at the hip on this one. So the feasibility study is it's actually at no cost to us. I just have to get my board to sign off on it. And then there's a land trust group. I think they're out of Montana. They might not. They might be out of California, but the person that we're dealing with is out of Montana. And he's going to be coordinating the whole thing, and I'll be in constant communication. Jeremy, I think we were talking about bringing it to the town council meeting too when we get to that point.
Yeah, and I mentioned it because I heard from Jeremy that the county may be talking about doing some fire related thing too, and that.
Yeah, I see some problems with that, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Well, through the chair, if I can jump in for a second, just to give some more clarification. Some residents may have received a flyer from the county or seen on YouTube or local TV commercials around sea level rise and wildfire safety. And it's clear the county is thinking about combining those two hazard issues into something larger than what initially looked like a standalone sea level rise tax. I've been in contact with the county executive and expect to have more conversations, and have certainly shared the concern that we don't want to be competing for the same dollars at some point.
MJ and then Ray. Or Bud. I don't know why I said Ray. MJ and then Bud.
Oh, hey, Bud, why don't you go first? And
just a small point. What about Midpen? All their land is right next door to all of us in the Portola Valley and Woodside. What interaction do you have, and how does it fit into your plan?
Well, constant interaction for one with them. Currently working with them on the Hawthorne property to clear that southern boundary to our town ordinance of 50 feet. That needs to be done over there. We've worked with them, as you know, in the past on the area behind the sequoias and doing clearing back there. And we'll continue to work with them. They have their own fire management plan now, where they have introduced the potential of doing prescribed burns on some of their lands. We're working with them on our grant that we got from Woodside Fire and Fire Safe in cooperation with Mid-Penn too as well, to do the $2.6 million worth of ridgeway clearing up on Skyline from the southern end to the northern end. So we're in constant communication with Mid-Penn. I think things are getting better with them than they were in the past. I think it's easier to work with them now that they have a fire management plan. And I try to get my requests into them early on in the year for the year and what I want to see done and cleared. And then we work together throughout the year to try to make sure that those get done.
Thanks.
MJ?
Yeah, thanks, Don, for that presentation. I don't quite understand what a linear fire assessment model is compared to the mathematical. I was just wondering, when CAL FIRE comes out with their new maps, are they using, which model are they using?
I believe they're going to use a linear model. So it would be very similar to CAL FIRE's maps. But the difference between what CAL FIRE did in 2008 and what we're planning on doing is the how close they get to the landscape when they. So we're going to be using 5-meter LiDAR. So we're going to be capturing more details than CAL FIRE will capture, because they don't go that deep with their mapping, because they have so many. They have 100 million acres to map, and for them to capture the detail that we can capture in 32 square miles, I don't think it's not effective for them.
Okay, but is CAL FIRE also including the structure as part of the hazard?
No, I don't think they're going to include that. No.
So what you're doing then, by adding in all the, fuel load of the houses, does that mean you're thinking that you'll be declaring that the district to be in a higher fire hazard zone than what CAL FIRE will say that we are in?
Potentially, yes. I think it will.
Yeah.
Regardless of putting the structures on there, if you took the structures out of it, even if we did ours at a 5-meter LiDAR, which it's available to us and we are going to use that because it's been done, we're going to capture more details of canyons, ravines, slopes, and fuel complexes, because it brings it down to a much greater detail. Now, to the extent that we're going to include structures, we should be including them, but I just don't know that we're still working on that with the experts as to what is going to be the best way to include them, because none of the fire modeling will include a structure. If it sees a structure, it shows an NB, non-burnable. It just shows it as non-burnable. We know that is not true. So it's like, you're going to tell me that this structure won't burn. We know differently. And so to just disregard that, I think is a very big disservice to the people that live in this district and to us. We can't disregard it, but to what level can we include it? That's what I'm trying to work out with the experts right now.
Yeah, because basically no one else is doing that right now. Isn't that
Well, there's a
correct?
few people that are doing it. Yeah, Carol Rice is doing it. She's been doing it. She did it with Contra Costa County, but it just depends on the level and how we want to work it with our fire district.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thank you.
is it possible to get a copy of your presentation so that we can put it, well, at least be sent to the committee members? And I don't know if we can retroactively put it in the agenda on the
Attach it to
website.
the minutes.
You can, yeah. So we can attach it to
I'll
the
get
minutes.
it to, who should I get it to?
Carrie, and then she'll send it out. Or
Okay.
get it what? No, MJ, you're
Listen,
the secretary. Send it to MJ.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, send it to MJ. And then also, I guess
Also, along with that, I'll send, just because there's so much mention of the NIST report in there, I'll send you a summary of the NIST report to add with it too.
Yeah. I think we'd still like you to come back next month. We can talk, but and I agree with Craig, we don't want to compete for the same dollars, but there's so many different programs and possible ways to approach this problem. And we are going to rely on your expertise a great deal. And I think part of this process is educating the community and bringing them along with us as we make these decisions, because it's going to be a big job.
Yeah, I mean, if the county does one and we get some of that, that's great. But the problem with that is there's going to be so many hands in that pot that by the time we get our chunk of change here in where we really need to do it, because this end of the county is where the problem really exists. If we want to make any major changes here and reduce our risk, we're going to need more than what we're going to get out of the county.
So we're going to have
That's my hunch.
We're going to have to identify what the town needs to do, and then what the fire district needs to do, and
both towns.
Yes,
this will be the fire district, which incorporate both towns.
Right. Okay. Great. Is there any? Yes, Nona.
I have a general question. Your emphasis on the fuel content in structures makes me wonder, do you have a rough idea of how many houses, how many residences in Portola Valley and Woodside your team has actually evaluated already, and how many more need to be done?
So we have currently, right now, we have about 6,000 parcels in the fire district. And we try to get through because of our staffing and the amount of inspectors that we have to inspect that many homes, we try to get through that in a 3-year period, doing about 2,000 a year. That's our goal. And we use our engine companies to do that as well. Yeah. But I'll add to that I see this as a big priority, and I've brought on one additional I'm bringing on one additional full-time inspector and 2 part-time inspectors during fire season to help us do a better job, because I think the district, the people that live in the district are not doing a very good job of creating appropriate defensible space around their properties. And we need to have more enforcement on it. And in order to do that, I need to have more boots on the ground going out and checking these properties. So that's what we're doing this year. I've already cleared it. And so it's just moving forward after July 1st with that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And enforcement will definitely be a program that we will be discussing. Okay, I saw Karen's hands up first.
Hi, thank you, Dawn, for being so clear on how important structures are in this equation. I know that some members of this committee have wanted to ignore that in the past. And it's just important. We have to plan for that. We have to figure out how that works with development and all the new housing that's coming in. I don't want to, I guess I would really hope that we can, as Portola Valley, being here in Silicon Valley, that we can be the leaders in the state. So far, we passed the home hardening ordinance. Let's keep going. Let's, and I think this is another step in that direction. That we can help the whole state figure out how to do this. It's a tough problem. I had a question on that. When you use the word linear, and I used to work in the algorithm space in my prior life. I don't see this as a linear problem, and I'm not sure why using the word linear. I don't know if I don't think it's an exponential or whatever. I'm just curious. It's a minor point, and we don't necessarily need to have to answer that now. But my other question that is more general is, so fire, when they're doing their assessments, they're doing it at a 200-acre level, I believe. That's huge. And that's really just, forest. It's not really, if you think about a national park, they have a handful of structures. So of course they don't have to worry about that in the large scale. I was wondering, what level do you expect us to go to the parcel level, to an acre or two? So, my parcel might be high, my neighbor might be moderate, do you have any sense of where we can land on this?
It's 5 meters. So what is 5 meters if you do the conversion?
It's tiny. So
yeah, it's going to capture a lot of detail. Yeah.
So in a sense, it would be, splotches throughout the whole town. So you may even have a acre land where half of yours is high and another area is moderate, another area might be really high, depending.
I don't think it'll, not on a 1 acre piece of land. I think, I'm not an expert on it, but I don't think it would go to that much detail where it would split an acre to very high and high or high or moderate. That would be a question for one of the fire ecologists.
Yeah, and I'm just curious about the granularity. So it could get relatively granular, compared
But they take that 5 meter, which is very accurate, and then they just to make sure, they spend a lot of time on the ground truthing it, making sure that what it says it is. And so that's a big part of the process.
Right, and it can also change over time. So a new owner comes in and doesn't bother to do any management, and you don't see it, so anyways, I don't need to go into all that. So that's all my comments. Thank you.
Okay, Dudley?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. And Don, thanks so much. That presentation is fascinating. And obviously the mapping that you're doing and the way you're thinking about this will be really important to all of us going forward to learn from. I think it's also interesting as a model for every one of us as residents, because what you're looking at, we need to look at on our own property level. And we can look at the kinds of questions that you've outlined, both in terms of the hardening issues and of the fuel reduction issues. And I think as neighborhoods and neighbors, we need to talk to each other about doing what your inspectors are doing on a much more local level, a neighborhood, even a street level. That's much easier in some areas than others. I have the advantage of living in an area with a neighborhood association, which makes it much more doable. But even in an area where houses are more spread out and there is no association, a handful of people who are concerned about fire can use the presentation you gave us as an outline for what we can look at ourselves, and particularly thinking about how the vegetation and the structures interact and what we need to do to protect the vegetation in such a way that the structures will be much less likely to burn, and then what to do to the structures. So thank you for giving us a model as well as for telling us where you're going with this, which will be helpful.
Thank you, Dudley. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the part that I talked about, the inside out and the outside in. And the inside out is starting with the structure. As a homeowner, there's a lot that you can do at the structure and parcel level to try to decrease or reduce that risk.
Right.
And the reason why we looked at it that way is because that's the way that it happens. It's the intense, rapid spread of fire over the landscape. And the type of fuel that structures add to that only increases that propagation and intensity and adds to the problem. So that's a good way to look at it.
We all need to understand that better. Thank you.
Okay, Rusty?
Thank you, Jennifer. But most importantly, thank you, Don. I want to keep this at a high level, but I can't commend you enough for the professionalism and the clarity and the insightfulness of the presentation and the analysis that you just gave us. And at the highest level, the most important thing I heard was focusing our appreciation on what's the principal hazard that we confront. The rapid propagation, spread of fire. It's the rate, the direction, the extent, and the intensity with which fire can spread in our environment. I thought that was an extremely important point. Second thing I thought was extremely important about your presentation was to approach this both from the outside in, from the large scale to the small scale, but also from the small scale to the large scale, to not restrict or limit your analysis to one approach only. And the third thing I thought that was extremely important about this was your acknowledgement and recognition that to do a competent assessment, we have to look at all the fuel sources that combine to cause the spread of fire that put us at hazard and jeopardy. Not just the vegetative fuels, but the structural fuels, the vehicular fuels, the infrastructure fuels, all the man-made fuels. And I just think that it's so sobering and so informative that I want to come back to the point that Jennifer made about your presentation. This is a highly educative presentation. What can the district do to spread this message? And what can the town do to spread this message? What can this committee do to spread this message? Because if we come back to funding the efforts that are needed to address this, they aren't going to get funded if we have an uneducated electorate. Until the 4,000 other people in this town who are not on this Zoom meeting understand and appreciate the significance and the urgency of the message that you just delivered, we're not going to be funding anything. We're not going to be changing anything. We need to reach out collectively to all of our neighbors and get them engaged and aware of what the significance of this is. So thank you very much for doing this. And I hope we can see the committee, the town, and the district use this presentation and what comes out of the work you're doing to educate all of us so that we can work to protect ourselves. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And that was one of the things that, we discussed too, is it's once this hazard and risk assessment is done, I mean, we can still do it now, education and outreach can happen now. But when it's done, it's also an education and outreach tool to help our leaders understand and also for our residents. So the good news is that in talking to some of these contractors, it's not going to take as long as I thought, because a lot of the 5-meter LiDAR is already done for us. So most of it is going to be the ground truthing. So hopefully we have this to help out with our safety element. Fingers crossed.
I have one other question for you, Dawn. So as the committee tries next month to start looking at these programs and ideas, what do you think would be the best next step? Should we have you back to start talking about being more clear? You want fuel reduction, you want these kind of programs, or would you rather have us do a presentation first of all the different programs so that the committee becomes educated? I mean, I think the committee is fairly educated already, but really cover matching funds, fire-wise, enforcement, a little overview of all the different possible ways we could approach it, and then have you come in. How do you want us to?
Well, I'm pretty consistent with being on these every month anyway. I like to be here. I like to hear what's going on. I like to give updates. So I'm going to be involved. I'm going to be working right alongside you guys. So, anything that I have, I'll bring to the table, and then I'll listen to what other things that are going on throughout the district or throughout the town. But, there's another list of recommendations that we're waiting from our friends at Cpa that I'm hoping we'll get sometime in August, end of August. And they've done a very comprehensive research. They've researched both towns. They've researched the policies of the fire district, and they're going to come up with some recommendations on how we can make this town more fire adapted and fire resilient.
Okay. So is that okay with the committee? Do you want to have a very comprehensive overview of the different kind of programs we might, so we kind of have a toolkit and we all are on the same page with the different programs, and then we can ask Dawn about them. Does that sound good? Anyone have any other discussion points or ideas? Okay.
Jeremy has his hand up.
Yes, Jeremy, and you're next anyways.
Oh, thank you. I sort of tying what I'm going to say next into Dawn's presentation. Dawn, thanks for all your hard work on this, and appreciate you keeping us in the loop and having Melvin involved in the process. It's really been valuable. Last week, Dawn and I and the chief and my counterpart at Brookside had the opportunity to greet our friends from Cpa. They came to town. So 3 members of the Cpa team, and then Dr. Steve Quarles, who's involved in the studies that you've read about or you've heard about today. And we talked with them in the morning and then took them on a tour in the afternoon. And my takeaway from much of that day was kind of reflecting on something Dawn said, was the opportunity for vegetation management on properties and retrofitting existing homes is huge. I would, if the council was asking for my recommendation on how to support the district and the like, I would be saying those 2 things as numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20. They were certainly impressed with how much vegetation there is, the lack of some of the work, and they were very struck by how much wood siding they saw in town. A lot of commentary on that. As other than a few very large property owners in town that tend to be public property owners, the vast opportunity exists on privately held land. So I think that we're all trying to figure out how we can support that process through the committee's good work, whether it's through a parcel tax or the like. But I really want to emphasize that, and I'll probably become something of a broken record as it relates to that part of what I think we've all understood to some extent. In the end, I think it's about really finding opportunities for resource to the district. And I'm really thankful to hear, I've heard this privately, but just publicly wanted to say that I appreciate the district bringing on more staff to do some of this important work. Those are my 2 cents.
Okay. And Jeremy, do you have any staff updates?
I do, and they'll be relatively brief.
Oh, and I'm so sorry. I think Christy had her hand up, and
sure.
And I suppose that, Christy, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just, thank you, Dawn, for that wonderful presentation. That was very thorough. Looks like you have all areas covered. I do have a question on 6622 SB 12, local government planning and zoning for wildfires was amended. And there's a lot of information in this bill. It's above me. And I'm just wondering if you can keep us updated on that bill. It looks like they've made a lot of amendments. They talk about very high fire risk areas. And I did notice one thing, that urban areas considered 10,000 residents or more, and we are below that. So how does that affect us in looking at this bill? And at the end, it has some deadlines of 2023 and 2024. So I'm not going to ask you to on the spot comment on it, but that would be an area of interest for this committee and for us to keep updated on. And maybe Jeremy has a lobbyist that we've hired, if they can also come in and update us as well. Thank you.
I'm glad you're not going to ask me on the spot because I don't know. So I'm going to ask you again for what was the bill so I can look it up.
Oh, SB 12.
SB 12?
Let's chat offline. I've been tracking it, and I had a conversation with our town lobbyist actually twice in the last week about the bill. It's as Christy, as you pointed out, it was just very recently amended, and it's going into committees over the next few weeks. The lobbyist let me know this morning that they were tracking, and we're going to have some conversations with folks to give us an update on where things are. So I'll be happy to bring that to you, Don, and bring it to the committee as appropriate.
Yeah, I'm happy to have Jeremy. Jeremy's usually the one that sends me something, says, hey, did you see this? And I'm like, no, I'm not enough time in a day to keep up with all these bills.
Okay, so Jeremy, go ahead and give us our staff update.
Great, thank you very much. Congratulations, Chair, on your election. And it's great to see the body meeting again. I have 5 updates for you. The first is just on the safety element process. And some of this has been covered, so it's a little repetitive, but just to bring it into some context on where things are and how the committee can engage, because there are opportunities to do so. There were meetings between staff and consultants and a few committees, EPC and geologic safety. And I encourage the committee to review in particular, the May 17th EPC meetings recording if they want to see that discussion. The drafting of the safety element, it continues and maybe done at the end of this month, early next month. When it is in draft form, we're going to bring it back to committee, so this committee will have an opportunity to discuss it. So I don't want you to think that that's been missed out. Don and staff, my staff have had a few conversations about town open space and opportunity to do some work on our open space akin to what you've been seeing over the last few years in the town's right of way. And we haven't completed a full-blown analysis of what we would like to see done on those properties, but I anticipate that staff and the Woodside Fire Protection District will work on that over the summer. And if that work is completed, I will be bringing to the council as part of the September revision budget package, a potential amendment to the amount of money that we're spending on such work in town. Some of the properties don't need as much as others, but there are certain properties that do need the work. And we're thankful for Don and his team to give us the guidance on what needs to be done. I mentioned the Cpa Visit, so I won't touch on that. Briefly, just a huge thank you to Jennifer and MJ for the fantastic fair. It was wonderful to see hundreds of people in attendance getting great information. If you guys told me you wanted to do that once every 3 months, staff will support you in any way, shape, or form to make that happen. Not that I want to create work for you. And finally, wanted to bring this committee up to speed on a process that's just started with our friends at the County Department of Emergency Management. This used to be the Office of Emergency Services. I asked that staff to work with the town, our partners with Woodside Fire, the Sheriff's Office, and institutions that are concerned about evacuation-related issues. We have started meeting. I think we've had 4 meetings so far. We're hoping to meet for the next 5 months or so with the schools, with Alpine Hill Swim and Tennis, with the Sequoias about their various evacuation planning, if they have not finished such a plan, to get that work done using the experts that I just mentioned. And we're hopeful to take all that and put that together for a full-blown evacuation plan for the town. What we have found is that there's various levels of, shall I say, work that's been done so far based on the institution. And some of it is just related to communications. And I think in particular, the schools, both public and private, there's going to start to be a conversation about what parents should expect if we do have a wildfire event in town, and thoughts about how people can see their kids and the like. So more to come there. I'm really appreciative of the resource that the county has brought to bear on that front. And with that, that's my report. Thank you.
And Jeremy, with the meeting, with the possible review of the draft of the safety element, so we might see that in July?
Yeah, if it, it's going to be, our expectation is that it'll draft through June into July. And as soon as we have a sense of when that process is completed, I'll reach out to you, Jennifer, to schedule a time for the committee to meet, to have that opportunity to review the draft and provide the commentary that's important to make sure it's a good document.
So will that be like a doodle, like a separate meeting?
Yeah, yeah, I'll work with you to pull
Okay.
your committee,
All right.
the staff will.
Any other questions from the committee for Jeremy? Any other questions from the public? Okay. With that, I think we're going to adjourn. Do I have to have a vote to adjourn or no? Thank you so much, committee members. And we did go an hour over, but believe me, I'm very motivated to make these an hour-and-a-half meeting. And I promise I'm going to work very hard and be very brutal to do that. So I really appreciate you staying till 6.
I vote we stay on 2 more hours and discuss my favorite subject of wildfire.
No.
Don, that's okay, as long as you don't have that horrifying background picture that you keep showing.
Oh, yeah, I
you
took it
fighting
off for you. I
fires.
took it off for you.
Thank you, buddy.
Got me so many
Appreciate it.
times, I said, I better take it off.
So Jennifer, to answer your question formally, theoretically, yes, you do need a vote to adjourn. On the other hand, if everybody just disappears and there's no quorum and you're adjourned by default anyway. So if you don't have the formal vote and the meeting just ends, no big deal.
Okay, well, I think we all voted. Okay, thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.